Welcome to the 55th FSHP Annual and the first ever FSHP Annual podcast here in Orlando, Florida. Today we're joined by Nicole Reardon.
Yes.
And John Allen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for being here today. And I just want to, for the audience, can you just introduce yourself and tell us about your FSHP experience so far?
Well, I guess I'll start off. So I'm the current Educational Affairs Council Chair. And so in that role, I help to plan the annual meeting along with the help of our volunteers who serve on the Educational Affairs Council. Mm-hmm. This year, we're also in the process of helping to plan for a secondary meeting, which will help to look and expand our horizons in terms of not just looking at hospital-based pharmacy practice, but looking even outside of the hospital and acute care and the role that pharmacists play in that space.
Awesome.
I'm Nicole Reardon. I'm a critical care trauma clinical coordinator at Ocala Regional Medical Center. My role in FSHP has sort of grown. Initially, I had done a couple of the talks here, some of the CE sessions, and from that ended up joining the Educational Affairs Council, and John and I worked together last year on the council when we made the pivot to a virtual meeting, so that had its challenges, and we're pretty happy with what we were able to pull off even in a virtual environment last year. From there, I ended up running for board position, and I was elected as board-elect, so we'll be installed onto the board this meeting. I'm really looking forward to having more voice and more involvement with the direction that FSHP is taking forward. I think we're doing a lot of great things, as John mentioned, trying to expand our reach into more of that true health system and encompassing all of our ambulatory care colleagues as well as our in-the-house hospital colleagues that we already are reaching with this meeting and trying to get that even bigger. As was mentioned in some of the talks earlier this morning, there really is a place in FSHP for everyone, and we're really trying to get that message out and trying to bring more people in.
Awesome. So, with our previous guest, the topic of mentorship came up. Who do you guys look to for advice and mentorship? Because I couldn't imagine anyone in pharmacy being where they're at now, accomplished, successful, without some sort of mentorship.
Honestly, for me, I think the people I've looked to for mentorship have changed as the trajectory of my career and the things that I do change. And I look to different people for different things. My PGY2 residency director was a great role model for me in what I wanted practice to look like when I first came out of residency and how to balance life with work and what I wanted to achieve in that. When I transitioned into a clinical specialist role, my manager at that time was phenomenal in terms of her involvement in national organizations and really gave me a good example of, okay, so if you want to be involved, here's the steps you need to take. Here's also how, you need to clear your calendar. When I had that moment of, I don't know what to do. I feel so far behind. And she's like, do you take an afternoon to, work on your own projects? Okay. And I'm like, no. she goes, you should probably do that. So, I think a lot of the mentors for me have been in the workplace, but outside of that, a lot of it's actually been, friends that I've had who may work in other fields now. A really good friend of mine is actually a master's nurse educator, and she is a great example of, what you can do to change the direction of your career depending on, what your goals are at that point in your life. So I use a lot of different people in that sense. But I think even, you can learn from students and residents that you have coming forward now where, there's such a fresh excitement for the profession and what it can do and, where it can go, that it's like, okay, you're right. We still have opportunities that we haven't explored and that we can still move forward on.
Absolutely. I promise we did not exchange answers ahead of time. No, so
it was a good answer.
Absolutely. I'll say from my perspective, I'm like Nicole. I'm trained actually as a critical care pharmacist, and so my residency director kind of served as that model for me in terms of being a sound clinician and caring for pharmacists or caring for patients in the intensive care unit and the complex drug regimens that they have. But he also was an example of being involved in the profession. And so when I was going through residency, he actually was president of a pharmacy organization. So it was one of those things where you learned by seeing. And so to this day, he remains someone that I talk to on a monthly basis. And I won't say how many moons ago it was, but we'll say it was a lot of moons ago since I graduated residency. But he can't get rid of me just yet. But as Nicole mentioned, your mentorship, you're not going to have one mentor who meets all of the criteria or will check all your boxes, right? You may have someone who helps you with the professional development piece and somebody that you look to in that space, whether it be also peer-to-peer mentoring. I see in where I am now, where I'm a faculty member at the University of Florida, there are a number of faculty members that I look at as I want to be just like them, right? Or they're doing things that they're doing great work, and I want to do that type of work as well. As mentioned, students can reinvigorate you, and that's certainly in my role as a faculty member, I get a chance to mentor students. And I think for them, they see us as kind of the rock stars or the folks that they want to aspire to be, but unbeknownst to them, I'm learning and they keep me just as invigorated in terms of the role. So I think mentorship comes in multiple types of packages, and you can never have too many mentors. I tell my students you should have a board of directors. And there's not just one person who's on a board, right? There's several that are on a board, and so you need to find who those board of directors are for you.
And I think it's really important too, like even in my current position, there's always stuff to learn. Yes. I learned so much from, my clinical manager, my director, my operations manager, it just in different realms of, hey, you handled this situation, maybe try this next time, or, there's always things that you can learn and improve on. So there's opportunities to be mentored and to be a mentor for someone else, all in even the same scenario or even the same workday, to be honest.
You mentioned learning. In the past year, there was we all had a good amount of time to just take some time off and just think, and maybe for the profession of pharmacy was for the better because we could figure out ways to move the profession forward in different ways that maybe we never thought of before. What is one thing that you learned to help you in your profession in the past year?
I think for me, it's been get out of the guessing business, right? Because as much as we like to think that, we've got everything planned out and this is going to work out great, as Nicole mentioned, we at the last FSHP meeting, we had 30 days to convert what was intended to be a live meeting to a virtual meeting. And under Nicole's leadership, we were able to do that. I think patience. And then also, I think it's opened my eyes to being able to use technology a little bit more efficiently in terms of getting knowledge. So it's funny, I'm on a podcast. Funny enough, I started to listen to podcasts and things like that. So when you have free time or have some downtime, it can be valuable.
So in a way, there really wasn't downtime on my end.
I was about to say, healthcare was downtime, but
actually we're more busy.
I'm still a bedside clinician, and so working in the critical care environment during this has been very challenging. But one of the things that it did bring to the forefront for us, not only just within our department and as a whole, but I think as a country, it's brought mental health into the forefront. I'm lucky enough that I've worked for a company that has offered a lot of mental health resources to its employees over the course, whether that's, a nurse line or a counseling line if you need to talk. My partner and I, for the ICU, we arranged that instead of changing services over a longer period of time, we switched services every 2 weeks so that we didn't get, completely burned out of seeing the toll that COVID really did take on the population and on our caregivers too. But I agree with John where he kind of pointed out, I think we've learned the importance of patience because, information has come out so fast. Everything was the next big thing. And so you kind of had to take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to give this thing a couple weeks, sit on it before we move, and then 2 weeks later, maybe it's not the next big thing anymore. So while I think there's some benefit to seeing this preprint literature and, getting information to people faster, you've also seen some of the harm in that with retractions because of falsified data or other issues that, if had gone through the peer review process could have been addressed. And so you're kind of, trying to do the best that you can for the patient as you're seeing them in a disease state where you don't know much, and balancing that with, okay, what level of evidence is acceptable to me before I find and use that treatment? So I think it's been very interesting and a really, really big learning opportunity.
And having gone through and still currently going through this pandemic, what do you think pharmacists do very well? And then what would you also like to see as a whole that we can improve upon within the next years to come?
Well, I think one of the things Nicole mentioned was being familiar with the data and being familiar with the literature. Pharmacists, particularly in the critical care setting or infectious diseases setting, are viewed upon as the go-to in terms of understanding the literature as it relates to pharmacotherapy and the latest trends. And I know one of the things that was apparent is how much folks will rely on critical care pharmacists and rely on infectious disease pharmacists for knowledge and for best practices and things of that sort. So I think we've taken a huge step forward in that space. I think even telehealth, right? Our ambulatory care colleagues stepped up when COVID made us adapt to the changing environment, and we still needed to provide hypertension services. We still needed to manage hypercholesterolemia, manage several disease states. And so it's forced us to evolve in some ways. So I'm proud of the profession for doing that. One area I think we could probably do a little bit better on is maybe bragging on ourselves a little bit. We tend to be humble in terms of our activities. And when I say humble, my practice concept or theory has always been, I don't care who gets the credit as long as the patient at the end of the day gets the right drug therapy. And so in some ways that's helpful, and that helps to build team morale, obviously, or team bonds. But in some ways, sometimes pharmacists are not recognized. I will say I think that's changing. I think folks are particularly now recognizing that the important role that pharmacists play in care.
I agree. I think that there were a lot of opportunities for us and a lot of things we did really well with, especially our ambulatory care colleagues in telehealth, and getting a lot of those programs turned so that especially our high-risk populations, our transplant patients, our oncology patients didn't have to take such a high risk and come into a clinic where they can perhaps have their issue addressed via telehealth. I really hope that continues to be options for some of our most vulnerable populations. I think that that's something that would be really positive as a result out of all of this. I think I do agree to an extent. I don't think pharmacy does a really great job of bringing attention to ourselves in that. I think you saw some of us starting to say, hey, you know what? We're starting to get recognition because we're vaccinating, we're doing all of these things, and people are realizing like your pharmacist is a lot more than somebody who's, putting pills in a bottle for you. I've had the opportunity during this to explain to people who are like, so what do you do in the hospital anyway? Like, I didn't even realize there was a pharmacist there. I was like, oh, well, let me tell you a little bit about it. I round with the medical team. We help make the best decisions about what drug is going to cover whatever organism you have if you're infected, or, we're going to make sure that your drugs are appropriately dosed for your kidney function, and trying to explain it in terms that they understand, but also to make it known that there are pharmacists in all sorts of areas. And I think that as the pandemic has moved, you're starting to see more of that in, oh, hey, your pharmacist can, yes, do your clinic visit and also give your vaccine, but they're also there for you in the hospital. And people are like, I didn't know that. So I think it's brought some awareness to our profession that, it's an unfortunate way to bring that awareness, but I hope will help us move forward, especially as we start looking at things like provider status and really trying to get that, aggressively pushed.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Is there a specific accomplishment that you've achieved throughout your career that's really shaped who you are today?
Oh, gosh. I mean, It's hard to say. I can pinpoint probably an instance where it shaped my career trajectory. Honestly, that would probably be my academic rotation as a PGY1. I had the pleasure of doing that rotation with Pauline Cawley, who is a critical care pharmacist who's out at Pacific University in Hillsboro, Oregon. And I got to, do critical care lectures in a school pharmacy setting, and it really solidified my interest in the ICU as a practice location. Had you told me when I started pharmacy school, like, not only are you going to go to the hospital, but you're going to go into the ICU and you're going to love it, I would have been like, sure. You keep thinking that. But yeah, it really opened my eyes to a lot of opportunities, I think, and, caused me to look for my PGY2. And, going into that environment, my second residency gave me a lot of confidence, gave me a lot of great experiences, because the pharmacists in Nebraska are highly involved with, code response, the emergency department, all these things that you're right there with the patient. So I feel like that kind of shaped my trajectory of my career. And, after doing all of that, one of the ultimate goals for me was I wanted to try and achieve fellowship in the Society of Critical Care Medicine, because that organization for critical care is multidisciplinary and is one of the most prominent organizations in that. So that was really a solid goal of mine that I was like, I need to do this for the course of my career.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's well deserved, by the way. I think for me, much like Nicole had mentioned, it's not any singular event for me. It's probably a compilation of events that actually drove me into, and in this case, I'll speak to academia, just so not to be a broken record in terms of critical care. I think for me, moving into pharmacy academia was really making that connection with the students. And it started as a resident, PGY1 resident, where I'd frequently have students on rotations, have other trainees, whether it be even in my second year as a resident, having first year trainees under me, really coaching them and teaching them and seeing almost that light bulb aha moment that frequently our trainees have, particularly when they're in the critical care setting where they're not as familiar with those topics. And so for me, that was really the moment that said, okay, maybe you can do this academic stuff. And so that's what really pushed me into it. I had mentors that thought that I could do it, and they pumped me up, and that was helpful for me in that space. In terms of accomplishments, I kind of think all of that's led to now I actually serve as Associate Dean for Diversity, Inclusion, and Health Equity at our College of Pharmacy at the University of Florida. And so for me in that role, I tend to be very student-oriented, right, in terms of making sure that the programs and the environment is inclusive for our students. And I think all of that started really back when I was a resident, making sure that I was taking care of the students. We were, trying to cultivate an environment where they could make mistakes, right? And know that they could grow from those types of mistakes. And so I've taken that mindset with me all through academia, and it helps me to this day in my current role to make sure that we're trying to make an environment that's inclusive and welcoming for everyone.
And don't let him fool you. His accomplishments in critical care and everything are equally as impressive.
So be better at bragging on themselves.
Fair enough.
So early in this conversation, you actually alluded to a second meeting or something of that nature. Can you just, for the audience, can you give us some sneak peeks on that? What does that look like?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek. We're planning it right now, or in the process of planning it. We'll really try to focus in on non-acute care settings. So not, a critical care as much as we're critical care and infectious disease practitioners. It's going to be focused more on the outpatient setting, more ambulatory care focused, and really transitions of care as well, and the role that pharmacists can play in that. I think there's probably some opportunity for us as well to start talking about perhaps specialties that perhaps are less discussed in the inpatient realm. So whether we're talking about specialty pharmacy and the unique situations, unique roles that pharmacists have in those areas. I think that's also an opportunity for us. So more to come on that.
I had to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. More to come. Certainly, hopefully that you guys will be there as well.
So lastly, how would you both define a successful pharmacist?
You saved the hardest question for last.
Of course.
Don't worry, I'll follow it up with a fun one. Don't worry.
I mean, sorry. I think, everybody's definition of what makes them successful for themselves is going to be a little bit different. But I think as a whole for the profession, is your pharmacist able to solve a clinical problem for you? Are they able to protect patients from harm, and also to advise patients in, a way that allows the patient to have a voice in their healthcare, but also to, guide them toward a decision that's, going to best serve their healthcare as well. I think, pharmacists have a lot of roles to play, whether it's in the hospital, in a clinic, even within the government where you're talking FDA or, patients with the public health service or anything in that kind of role as well. There's a lot to be said for our pharmacists who develop policies for the nation and our healthcare there as well. So I think, success is a lot of it's self-defined, but really it's keeping the patient, for me at least, I think at the forefront of what you're trying to accomplish.
Don't steal her answer.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that, in addition to what Nicole mentioned, I think for me, along the same lines is, as a pharmacist, certainly need to be competent in terms of drug therapy. I mean, that goes without saying. But I think it's the other parts of being a pharmacist, whether it's being an advocate for your patient and staying on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
Once you graduate, that degree is pretty much obsolete because you're going to have to keep moving. When you get your degree, you're literally going to be a pharmacist, hopefully, for 30, 40 years after, right? We have pharmacists now that are still going to, when they graduate 2021, or I guess 2022, are going to be practicing in 2042.
Yeah,
2052, right?
Yeah.
Sure. And so
I feel old already.
You're right, and think about how medicine.
Me too. Thanks.
Think about how medicine has evolved and how pharmacy's evolved, right? And so I think being inquisitive, but also wanting to stay on the cutting edge, but keeping the why at the center of that, right? You do that to provide better care for your patients. The additional piece that I'll add is bring somebody along with you, right? Don't just, once you get there, to me, that's not enough, right? You reach back, bring people along with you. As was mentioned, we've all had the privilege of having mentors that have helped guide us and shape us. Do that for colleagues. And so that's the piece I think also as a pharmacist, a successful pharmacist.
As a somewhat shameless plug for FSHP in this kind of setting, I think one of the things that's often overlooked is the fact that involvement in your state and national organizations can really help, not only help you feel more up to date on things with the CE offerings that are available, but also gives you that opportunity to network. You can make friends all over the country. I'm not originally from the state of Florida, and so when I moved here, I knew my colleagues at the hospital I worked at, and my network wasn't very large. Getting involved in FSHP has really helped to broaden that network within the state. And so now if I run into a problem where I'm trying to figure something out about how we should, structure this process, and I know someone who's done it in the state in a similar way, well, I know they're following the same laws that I have to follow. So it's easier for me to reach out to that in-state colleague and say, hey, how did you handle this? Because I know they're under the same laws and guidance and things that I'm going to have to follow. Is it any less valuable to reach out to colleagues that are, in Nebraska and Oregon, Wisconsin, across the country? No, of course not. I still reach out to those colleagues, but I also then have to filter that through what's happening in the state. And I just think that there's a great opportunity for people, especially as you're transitioning from student into practicing pharmacist, to not forget to stay involved in those organizations that you were a part of as a student, but to bring that role in as a pharmacist and keep that energy. Because I really think that keeping your involvement in organizations like FSHP is going to make this profession even better and help continue to drive it forward as you have new ideas and bring new things to the table.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you both for taking the time. I know you guys are super busy here today. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. And it was a pleasure meeting you guys.
Likewise.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
All right.